Judge, can you speak into the microphone?
Forgot about that. We're going to call the meeting to order. Janine, please call the roll.
Good morning, and just as a reminder to all who are in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Judge Adrian.
Here.
Ms. Yarham.
Here.
Ms. Gibbons.
Here.
Mr. Cross. Mr. Cross is absent at the moment. Judge McClellan.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you. We'll move to public comment. Are there individuals who wish to make them?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Very well. Approval of minutes from August the 19th have been distributed. Is there a motion to accept the minutes as distributed?
Approved.
Second?
Second.
Probably moved and seconded the motion that the minutes be approved. Oh my goodness. Don't I hate that? That's Marvin. Hey, Marv. Okay. We'll see you when you get here. Okay. Not a problem. We're moving forward. Bye-bye. He says he's stuck in traffic on I-77. Okay. We're approving the minutes. It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any unreadiness on the motion? Any readiness on the motion? Any readiness on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Okay. Any opposed? Okay. There being a quorum, a majority in favor, minutes are approved. Old business. Bridget, we put you back on the hot seat.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We are going to continue on in the PowerPoint presentation. Again, we're going to do a review of the programs, and I'm going to have to skip through a little bit here. I apologize. So last time, we talked a little bit about our current state and programs. We went through diversion services. We talked about all the services that are predominantly family-centered. We also discussed the outcomes that we have regarding recidivism of youth on probation. We did a very, very quick overview of specialized dockets. I think the gist of what we were trying to get at last time was to highlight that in the youth justice system, we are doing all that we can to provide as many off-ramps as possible for young people, especially those who have co-occurring mental health substance abuse disorders, who end up in the youth justice system that are not jeopardizing community safety, but their behaviors need to be addressed. So at the court, we have many opportunities to divert youth away from the youth justice system. So I think that was the majority of the time that we spent. We left off right before we got into alternatives to detention. So when we use the word diversion in a traditional sense, we're talking about diverting youth away from formal court involvement. Today, we're going to talk about alternatives to detention. Some folks use those words interchangeably, but alternatives to detention is really a focus on keeping youth away from secure confinement within our juvenile detention facility. So we, like I mentioned last time, we are a JDAI court, which is Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. We receive consultation from the Annie Casey Foundation and our partners at Catalyze Justice to help us enhance and improve outcomes for youth involved in the youth justice system. We know that the research indicates that when youth are unnecessarily confined for nonviolent offenses, their outcomes are worse than those that never spent a day in detention. I will say that this is currently a bit of a struggle area, and Jen, you can feel free to jump in on this. It is certainly an area where workforce development is an issue. I would say of all the programs, aside from our family-centered treatment approaches, alternative to detention programs has taken probably the biggest hit when COVID hit our world. So the first program I wanted to highlight that we utilize is a pretty deep end program. It is reserved for moderate to high risk young people who have numerous interactions with delinquency matters. So when I say moderate to high risk, it means our risk assessment scores them moderate to high. Our risk assessment that we use is the OYAS. So the program I want to talk about here that you can see on the screen is our Community-Based Intervention Center. This program is physically located down at the Metzenbaum building in the lower level. These are some of the kids that we're working with in here are all males, about 14 up to 17 and a half years old, and they come to the program. There's 2 different tracks in this program. First is a half day. It's an evening report. So they come in, they get cognitive behavioral therapy intervention programs, and I'll talk about the curriculum and all of that on the next slide. But the other track is a day report. So they receive schooling and education, all of that, and I'll get into that in a minute. But these are kids that have pretty serious offenses. We're able to still maintain them safely within the community with a very high level of structure. So a lot of these youth are on electronic monitoring through our home detention department, and they're going to this program Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday. So the outcomes for that, we have a 65% success rate, and I think that's how they're released as successful. So again, when we talk about completion is different than long-term outcomes. Completion is how did the young person exit the program? Were they successful, or did they fail the program because they were rearrested, brought into the detention center, or stopped coming? So 65% success rate for a very complicated group of young people is about what we would anticipate. And then the number of youth, our long-term goal that we look at it, and the court does track this closely for all of our reclaim-funded programs, is the number of youth that avoid placement or commitment to DYS 12 months following termination. That's 85% of the young people who participate in CBIC are not placed out of the home and are not committed to DYS. So we're very happy about that outcome. Historically, we used to serve girls and boys in this program. That did not go well. So we made a decision to create another more trauma-informed, family-centered track for young girls, and we reserve this for our boys. So these can be pre or post adjudicated. So sometimes if it's a step down out of the detention center, we'll place a young person there. Other times we've tried numerous interventions, and this is our last effort before the youth is placed out of the home. We're going to try to keep them in the community and tightly wrapped. Again, Monday through Friday, they receive programming. We also partner with Renounce, Denounce, and Mentors for Cleveland Peacemakers for Saturday programming. We use University of Cincinnati's cognitive behavioral intervention that is specified for youth. It teaches problem solving, social skills, emotional regulation. Again, we have CMSD down in their teachers come on campus there and work with our young people. So those that are no longer engaged in a home school in their community and they've been suspended or something or they're not enrolled, they can go to CBIC and attend CMSD. And we have, other community partners, Case Western Reserve medical students for social and emotional learning, and hopefully soon we'll have some Fresh Start mentors working with our program. We're in process with that. So I would say, again, this is a struggle area as far as programming, trying to expand alternatives to detention and placements for young people who are arrested by law enforcement. So a few years ago, when we opened the Early Intervention and Diversion Center, we wanted to have alternative placements for young people to be triaged and then placed. in lieu of secure detention. So this is a contract with Applewood Centers. We call it the Daisy House because it's on Daisy Avenue. There are clinicians that work down there and receive referrals from law enforcement. They complete a behavioral health screening and triaging to help link young people to respite if they're appropriate. So just to kind of take a couple steps back, when I spoke of Project Calm the last time that we met, it is a diversion from formal court processing, but it is also an alternative to detention for young people who are arrested for domestic violence offenses. So because law enforcement have to remove someone from the home, we put in this program to divert those youth away from the detention center. Before Calm was developed, I think we had between 300 to 400 admissions in detention a year for young people whose highest offense was a domestic violence. And, these young people oftentimes are dealing with family conflict, parents who are overwhelmed with their mental health issues. Sometimes it's parental mental health, parental substance abuse. So the appropriate response for those youth is not detainment. That is not going to have great outcomes. So this is where law enforcement arrest a young person for domestic violence or another offense that we allow to be diverted away from our detention center. And the parent is saying, I will not take this child back home. No way, no how. And law enforcement are sort of stuck with the young person. That's where we created, in partnership with Applewood Centers, the Daisy House, where their clinicians do a brief screening process, and then they communicate with our contracted respite providers or group home providers to get placement and secure placement 24/7. We call those youth care centers, and they are accessible 24/7. Because the cases are going official on these ones where parents refuse to engage in Calm, those youth are arraigned the following morning. They don't come in through the Sally Port. They're walked in by the group home staff through our front doors, arraigned and processed, and usually are going home the next day. The two providers that we have left, and I will say one of the things I wanted to highlight is before COVID, we had numerous contracts with different agencies throughout the county where we had no problem placing young people. The minute COVID hit, many of these providers said, we are not taking fresh arrests. We do not feel that's a safe option for us. We had respite providers themselves that got sick from COVID, some that actually ended up passing away. So we did lose many providers that were, willing to take young people in. So we went from dozens of placements down to sometimes 0 placements for young people. And so the people that impacts is the young person themselves. It also impacts law enforcement. So law enforcement is spending several hours trying to explore options for placement for these young people. So we are now currently contracted with 2 group homes. There's Raven's House in Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries. And we also hold a secure bed with Applewood Centers that is dedicated just for juvenile court. And I will say, this is an ongoing process. I think we just met yesterday to rethink how we utilize that bed. So it's sort of ever evolving. Jen, did you want to add anything to that?
A couple things. So one, I think what you're saying about the access to respite really mirrors what we've seen in the foster care system is just fewer and fewer people wanting to foster, take kids into the home. Across the county, we've just seen a significant decrease during and post-COVID in sort of access to foster care and respite. In terms of why we went to Daisy, when we started doing early intervention and diversion, we had folks housed at Quincy, and we were finding it was easier for families to just leave the kid there, and we don't want kids to then be admitted into the detention center or left at the court. And so sort of moving the location out into the community helped us really secure a warm handoff, whether it was to a family friend or, grandma's house or wherever the kids were going to go for a brief period of time, or reconnecting with whoever their counseling provider was. We really wanted to move to a warm handoff instead of like the option for just a drop off. And I think we've found that that's worked much better because that option isn't there to just sort of leave your kid at the steps of the court. In terms of the bed, I think what we're seeing, that bed is a residential bed. It's a crisis bed, so short-term stabilization. We're seeing just more complex kids coming through, not just on the court side, but I would say any of the residential providers would say the same thing for the crisis beds that we have through the Adams Board, or if people have beds through child welfare. Kids used to stay 7 to 14 days. Now they're there 60, 90 days. Oftentimes these kids are turning over into needing a longer-term placement because they're coming with just such significant trauma and really complex issues and a really rough family history. So in our meeting yesterday where we talked about the bed, it was sort of like, it's not really a short-term crisis, right? This is a longer-term stabilization. So renaming that to be a stabilization bed or, versus crisis, which would be sort of shorter and immediate.
I have a question. You both mentioned something about family involvement. Can you give me any sense of what amount of success you're having in families being involved as opposed to those who want to wash their hands of it and let you take over?
So, I mean, family is everything when it comes to young people. When families are engaged, the outcomes for the young folks are tremendously better. That's really the focus. And I would say the vast majority of people who are involved in the youth justice system are going to be engaged in services. And that doesn't always require a court order from a judge or a magistrate. Many of our referrals are coming through our diversion center, and families are just really in need of supports and asking for help. Many times they don't want police involvement. They just want their young person to get up, go to school, stop disrespecting them, stop using drugs, stop engaging in violence. Most of those families engage in services with us and are successful, and we never see them again. The young people that we see continuously are the young people what Jen and I will often refer to as multi-system youth. That means they might have their toe in with child welfare, they have juvenile court delinquency matter, they have a long history of abuse and neglect. They might have the Board of Developmental Disabilities involved, and they need the number of services to wrap around those young people because their behaviors are so challenging and they have extensive trauma histories, or the families themselves have extensive trauma histories. When we can engage those caregivers or an alternative caregiver that the family identifies, we're so much more likely to have success. The ones that I think our probation officers, our magistrates and judges struggle with the most are when a caregiver is completely at the end of their ropes, they're overwhelmed, they're exhausted, their young person and them are no longer getting along, and they're throwing in the towel and saying, I can't do this anymore. Those are much harder cases. One, we have to make sure that we have a safe space for that young person. And when families engage, we can get young people to school. We can help them with their medication routine. We can do all the things that are going to be necessary for them to no longer commit future offenses. It's just really hard without family. So luckily, almost all of our programs are family-centered. But yeah, this is a tough point here. Once we get to the place where DCFS is not going to allow the police officers to drop the young person off, the court can't take these young people in because they don't meet admission criteria, the hospitals won't admit them, it really leads to law enforcement sort of stuck with the young person. So I will say, just to elevate before we move on to home detention, this is an area of need for the court. We need more vendors, more people willing to provide appropriate, healthy group home settings or respite beds. The court has done everything that we can to contract. We do have a bed hold with one of our group homes that is only for law enforcement, hoping that we can move those cases through and we reduce youth for being placed out of the home. We reduce youth ending up in child welfare because of parents refusing to take them home. And we will, at arraignment, provide, get in there if a parent is saying, I don't want this youth to come home, they can't come home. our judges and magistrates know they can call our service coordination and placement planning team, and they'll drop everything and come up and say, okay, let's get everyone together. Let's create a plan. We'll come right back later today with a plan to stabilize this young person. But I think those are some of the ways in juvenile court that we are different than the adult division, is that you have to have a family-centered approach. You have to have a lot of systems working, hand in hand together. And when that breaks down, the outcomes for young people is worse. So
Let me ask you just a real quick question. You indicated that you need more vendors. How do you develop that resource?
that's a great question. So I think we've put out numerous RFPs historically. We have also learned that, this is not an easy task for many vendors because some of the young people have significant trauma histories. So the smaller programs are usually the better programs. These large congregate care settings generally do not do well with young people of the masses. So smaller group homes, respite homes, or smaller agencies that can staff it appropriately. And staffing it means they can predict a number of referrals that are going to come through regularly and be ready to handle those cases. That on-call 24/7 component isn't something that a lot of providers can easily manage. That 24/7 admission is something we have to handle. It also requires law enforcement to have a stack of paper to get signatures from parents, which is different than adults. Parents have to sign on behalf of children if there's a medical authorization need, consent to treat, all of those things. That requires law enforcement to get signatures, and they do, and they work with us on that. But I'm not sure how many folks are out there willing to do this work, but we would definitely need more people able and willing to do the work.
I'm just troubled by the juxtaposition of the two points that you've made today. One with regard to the decrease of people who are willing to take on any kind of responsibility with regard to juveniles and after COVID, and the increase in the need for more people to do that. So I'm just troubled about what kind of incentives can be put forward. And again, I think this is part of what we've been charged with doing. That is, budgetarily speaking, is this a function of if you sweeten the honey pot with more money, will that overcome this reticence that people have as it relates to taking on, or is it just a thing like people are saying, I'm not doing this. This is dangerous for me.
I think it's a little bit of both, right? When you look at like a foster home, other counties, specifically like in Franklin, they pay more. So they'll say, oh, we'll take Franklin kids because the foster home has more of an incentive, right? The other challenge with some of these kids is there's a lot of rules around who can be in a house, right? If you have somebody who has some type of offense, you're not going to put an aggressive teenage boy with a girl. If you have 2 beds in a house, you can't have, certain kids in the same room. And so I think what is most successful when you're looking at respite for the court-involved youth is to have dedicated respite homes where they don't have other kids in the home, or at least other foster placement youth. They might have some of their own kids, or they have their own space for kids. So certainly that's one piece. I think the other piece is kids come at any time of the day or night. So maybe there does need to be more of an incentive if you're taking a placement on a Saturday night at 10 o'clock because, so-and-so got in a fight with grandma and there's nowhere for them to go. I think that might help a little bit. We've certainly just seen this, we had an aging foster parent population, and sort of the traditional population was people that were either, retired or people that were parenting sort of their own kids, and now it's sort of, well, I don't want to get sick, managing remote learning, really trying to, the kids are really complex. So having additional supports that could come into those homes, maybe some dedicated mentors or respite workers that then follow these kids beyond the few days that they're looking for short-term placement would be helpful too.
Okay, yep. Thank you, Jen. Okay, so we have our home detention unit, and they have 24 hours, 7 days a week, monitoring via GPS for all the youth that are placed on home detention. It's used as an alternative to detention. We will often use it as a step down from secure detention. So if a young person's adjusting well, we are ready to step that youth down, the family's ready to bring the young person back home, we'll utilize home detention for that. It is a order from jurists pending further court action. We do collaborate with numerous internal and external stakeholders. For example, CBIC works hand in hand with home detention. So, okay. So in response to the uptick that our community and actually almost all other communities across the country, we're dealing with a rash of car thefts. And for those cases, those were becoming a significant community safety risk because obviously the potential for lethality because of police chases and young people driving recklessly with stolen cars. So we spent some time doing a focus group with law enforcement. We went down to Cleveland's 3rd District and met with numerous officers and leadership with Cleveland Division of Police. And we received their feedback, how, they helped us to problem solve how we can do this without having to build a whole other detention center for car thefts. And so we came up with what we used to call the car theft pilot program. We piloted it with the city of Cleveland for the first year so that we could work out any issues and see if it impact was reducing the number of car thefts and if young people were responding to home detention. So what it allows for is it is now county-wide law enforcement to arrest individuals for a car theft. They call down to our admission process. Our admission screening officers look through their history. We work with the prosecutor's office to vet the case and see, is this appropriate for admission or can we use the car theft program for this? They bring the young person down. We place the person on electronic monitoring on the spot. The law enforcement officer brings the young person back home with a piece of paper that says, "Mom and Dad, please appear at court tomorrow. See you in the morning." And so all but one of our young people made it to arraignment the following day. So those were 60 participants. And of those 60 participants, 85% of them completed the program without a new admission in detention and without a new car theft incident. So we have been very pleased with this program. One of the added components that we phased in a little bit later after the pilot started was these young people at arraignment also can be screened by our early intervention diversion specialist, which offers programming. So in addition to putting a monitor on the young person and saying, now you're with the court, we put services into place to help the family. Obviously, anytime a young person is stealing a car, the family's in crisis, we want to help them. So we can put services involved for that young person and their family. So that is really the overview of our alternatives to detention. One other thing that we really wanted to share and talk about, which gets a lot of attention, but you have to remember that the young people that are in our detention center represent a low number of youth that actually come into contact with the youth justice system. So, we have in 2017, it was 2017, with the support of many of our youth justice advocates through Case Western Reserve, Schubert Center, the ACLU, and with financial support from the Gun Center, the court contracted with the Center for Children's Law and Policy to conduct a JDAI assessment of the conditions of confinement in our detention center. This report was, very helpful for the court and highlighted some areas of concern. And in addition to that, it gave us some very specific recommendations to help improve safety, the health and well-being of the young people that are detained in our detention center. The court this has been of highest priority for us to make sure that our detention center is a safe environment for young people and our staff. So the next few slides that we're going to talk about just highlight programming that we do in our detention center. So our detention center has education that's provided by Cleveland Metropolitan School District. That we have teachers in our detention center. We have special education. We have 2 physical education instructors, teachers. Based on the size of our school and the population that we have in the detention center, we do have to stagger our hours to reduce any incidents in the detention center school area. We have an extended school calendar year, which allots for 19 additional days of instruction for every student. We have had 21 high school graduates in the academic year of 2023. Since 2019 that we've been tracking, we had 94 high school graduates. And part of that is young people are coming in for more serious charges, so they're staying with us for a pretty significant period of time. And this is just a highlight I wanted to put in. This happened last Friday. We had our first college graduate in our detention center, so he earned his associate's degree. So that was a big, big deal for this young person.
Now, these people get a regular
Yes.
high school diploma as opposed to a GED.
Yes, we do not offer GED services in our detention center, only high school diplomas.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Apologize for being late, traffic. Yeah. The numbers that you gave before about the one before with the graduates. Okay, we had 94 graduates. How many people were enrolled, though?
Oh,
I mean, do you?
yeah, I mean, our average daily population at this point in time is it hovers between about 140 to 150. So all youth that are in our detention center, with the exception of our graduates, are attending school.
Okay. I was just trying to figure out if you had how many graduated, how many was in there.
Yeah. So, length of time, most kids aren't spending enough time in our detention center, hopefully, that's the bulk of their high school. But for some people with very serious offenses, that actually is a lot of their high school experience happens in our detention center. I didn't mention, some folks don't realize that we have, because kids are staying so long, we have a lot, and at this point in time, it's an entire house, and we're moving into even more than that, of young people who've graduated from high school are still with us. So we have really put an emphasis on post-high school graduation programming, Tri-C. There's many young people enrolled in that program, and this just requires our staff to do a lot more programming with these young people and keep them busy during the day. So the next couple slides, I will say most of the programming is on volunteer basis. We rely on community partners to come in and give us their time. We do not have specific funding for majority of the program in secure detention. Like the state reclaim allows us to use that for community-based, but that money is not reserved or supposed to be used for confined youth. So we have to get creative. We have to rely a lot on volunteers and donations and things of that nature to keep programming going. So this is just another example of donations from Creative Hope Studios. St. Luke's Foundation also helped us to create a program that is a recording studio. The kids absolutely love this, and we have a number of programs. Spread the Love Foundation, which is funded by the city of Cleveland, does recording, but it's more than just recording. It's art, it's making beats, it's creating, it's writing, it's mentorship. There's a lot of research on the importance of reducing trauma symptoms through music. The other, volunteer is our barbers from our I can't ever say this, La Barberia Institute of Hair. So we rely heavily on them. They cut all of the boys' hair, and that is a phenomenal program, and we are very grateful for them to come in and care for our kids and our young people and their hair. John Carroll Ballers is another longstanding relationship, and these young people from John Carroll love coming in, and the residents absolutely love their time with them and mentorship and playing basketball. There's just numerous programs that we have to grow self-esteem, social emotional work. Another one that we have until December of this year, we've had 2 years of benefiting from Edwin's leadership and restaurant. They train our young people in the detention center. The kids love this. They learn culinary skills. They get safe serve certification, and they get to, prep their own food, and they just absolutely love this program. Art Forward is case.
It's only to the end of this year?
That's when we have it funded until, so then we have to plan for that. So that's another one that we'll have to figure out. Edwin's is, and they are in the 5 days a week. They're in working with our residents.
So you have funding until the end of this year?
Yes.
Another budgetary consideration.
Yep. Art Forward is Case Western Reserve. These are students that volunteer with our young people, and obviously any art is meaningful for our young people. This year, we are the first detention center for this literacy program, which is Freedom Schools, and that was a phenomenal program. The kids were so upset that they were going to have to spend their summer reading, but these young people in this program really engaged these young kids, and they absolutely loved their time with Freedom School. So that kept them very busy. The other thing is if you've walked through our detention center, it's a very institutional environment. One of the findings from the report was to try to get more art on the wall. Beck Center of the Arts for the Arts helped us get a couple murals up. Also, our activity coordinators are spending lots of time with the young people doing Hoops for Hope basketball league, which was the first time. Is pretty historic for us to be able to bring kids who might have some issues with each other in the community, put all of that aside and be able to play basketball on a team with one another. We were able to invite families and community members in. It was phenomenal. So an emphasis on STEM learning has been another thing that we've been working on. Just overall trying to ensure that our young people are getting the most programming they can get while they're in our care. Youth for Christ is another program that spends a lot of time in our facility working on social emotional learning and rapport and mentorship with them. So mental health services, this is a big component of secure detention. This is, again, a contract we have with Applewood Centers. This is just an overview of the services that are provided under that contract. You can see 47% of the interactions are psych therapy. 36% was crisis management. I will say when we started this contract, the goal was just crisis management. Help us keep kids calm and safe while they're here. But because their length of time has gone up so much because of the severity of cases, there's a lot more therapy going on. And they are available. We have therapists in 7 days a week with altered shifts, and they're available 24/7. This is just an overview of the population from August 5th, 149 young people. That light blue is felony 1 aggravated robbery. Below that is our homicide-related offenses. The orange is felony 1, other felony 1 offenses. That maroon color is felony 2. So as you can see, we're trying our best to stick to admission criteria, which is the highest threshold of admissions in the state of Ohio for a juvenile facility. So felony 1s or 2s. Those vary over to the right. Felony 3s, 4s, and 5s are pretty few and far between. And the reason that sometimes those young people do end up entering our override decisions, and sometimes they've bombed out of placements, things of that nature. And just one other thing I wanted to elevate, this is an add-in. I apologize, I threw this in because I meant to cover this when we were going through some of the community-based program. Our court is trying really hard to work with community providers to reduce youth violence. We know that the court alone is not the answer to addressing youth violence, that this needs to be done in partnership with our community providers. We worked really hard, and we have a network of folks that helped us through the youth justice convening to get in contact and figure out who was out there doing good work in the community that just was doing it, but didn't have a referral source. So we've contracted with 20 grassroots agencies that are doing work in those high impacted communities and neighborhoods. So we were trying really hard to get more culturally responsive grassroots agencies to connect to young people so that when the court is done with that young person, they've made a connection with someone for the long term. So this is the list of all of those programs. And, you know, in this, there are mentors. There are mentors for deep end kids, but there's also mentors for kids that are just having their first contact with the court and just need a little helping hand to get away from further delinquency. Some of these are highly geared towards education, opportunities. Our kids are earning certificates left and right now, and that's what we're trying to do, is not just drop the hammer on young people, but give them skills to address the needs that drive them into the youth justice systems. So learning opportunities, educational, vocational, mentors, arts programs, you know, and then restorative justice programming to help young people learn from their mistakes, empathize with the person that was harmed, and make right to that person that was harmed so that they no longer are involved in the youth justice system. So this is our first year at it. We're now moving into year 2. And we've got Case Western Reserve working with us to evaluate each and every one of these programs so that if our funding is depleted on programming, hopefully they're gonna walk away with a 1-year evaluation that gives outcomes on how they've done. These are just one of the many ways that we're really trying to engage smaller agencies that are in it for the long haul and are coming from the communities that are highly impacted by gun violence and things of that nature. So more to come with that. I'm looking forward to their outcomes. I've heard really good things from their participation with Case Western Reserve, and I think this is a phenomenal partnership with our community providers. Yeah. Let me go back.
So when we get to where we could say something, this was one of the things I was gonna ask about is when I grew up, and that was only a couple years ago, that we had PAL centers, rec centers, after-school programs at the high schools, all kind of events, programs that we could participate in. If we can keep these, and I was gonna ask how long ago had we started this, because that's going to make a difference. So since you're saying it's been a year, it's going to take a little longer to reach the masses that's out there, but I can promise you that this will definitely help. Yeah. It has to be positive.
It's been really,
programs, when I was a commander with Cleveland, we participated in a few of these programs, and it really, really worked. So I hope that, I don't know if our group can support try to at least make recommendations to the county that they keep as much funding as they can for these programs, because I just think it's imperative that we have it. And if we can add some more, which I think that could be done,
and
help.
This was something for many years we were trying to get off the ground and failing miserably. I will say to the St. Luke's Foundation, our youth justice convening, they really helped us to identify some of these people that were in the community. We also did everything that we could to reduce the complexity of the RFP process, and that helped us to engage these folks and provide support to them. One of the things that, you know, we've talked about with these agencies is building in a network of technical assistance and supports to help them with things in addition to an evaluation. A program evaluation is great. Do you know how to apply for a federal grant? That could be a technical assistance support. Do you know what all of these complex forms are to get a contract with, the court? And really, our hats off to our fiscal department and our legal department to help us to kind of slow walk this through. People, these are not agencies that have infrastructure and a grant writer and a financial director. These are agencies that are doing the work from the heart. But what they're going to need help with is, one, looking at other available programming, and two, creating their own smaller infrastructure to help them have the skills to continue to provide this programming. So we're having lots of discussions with the city of Cleveland, too, on ways that we can do some work around. And I think the OJJDP Continuums of Care grant that we have, which is going to do resource mapping, gap analysis, and all of that, will help us to see where's the funding, where are potential gaps, and how do we continue to sustain some of this. But I think that would be something that I think would be an important recommendation, is that the county support what comes of the OJJDP grant. The county find ways to support, in conjunction with the court, some of these agencies to help us to be successful in the long run. And that's it.
That's enough. Thanks, Bridget. I mean, I have a much clearer idea of what's available. I appreciate, all the hard work that went into putting this together by you and your staff, and I know that it had to be, a heavy lift, but it does give us an idea of what's out there. I'm going to try to stay true to what I said and get us out of here at an hour's point. There are a couple of things that I wanted to put in front of the group just to kind of see where your heads are at. Did you guys get an opportunity to take a look at the governor's report? Okay. What am I saying? To some extent, I'm looking at the work that's already been done, and I'm saying, what are we doing?
Excuse me, Judge Adrian, is your mic on?
Okay, I'm sorry. I said, to some extent, as I look at the work that's already been done, both by the court and by the other organizations that have been examining the issues here, I'm saying, with all that's out there, it looks like our job is almost just to put together a compendium, okay? Because it's the need for another study doesn't seem to me to be the best use of time. I think that it might be useful for us to talk to the consumers of your services, as well as the people who are on the line actually producing those services, to see what they think needs to happen. And I had taken a cut at trying to review that scope of work document. And as I think about it some more, and especially after today's session, I think that has to be reworked some more. And I really would like maybe for each of you to give me an idea of the areas, maybe about 4, probably no more than 5 areas that we really need to do a deep dive in. And then we need to talk about who do we need to talk to. Okay. So if we can do those kind of things within the next, between now and the next meeting, that would be good. Part of our charge is, I guess at the top of our charge is to try to figure out how all of this impacts recidivism. So if the juvenile court was in a position to provide us with a wish list of prioritized wish list of where they could most use some additional fiscal resources, that would probably be extremely helpful. Okay. And also, as I think I pointed out to you guys the last time we were here, it would be useful if we could give a glancing blow to the elephant in the room as it related to the two issues that have been reported in the news. That is, what has the court done as it relates to tightening up the criteria and the oversight for assigned counsel, and what, if anything, is on the drawing board as it relates to interactions between the court and the county prosecutor's office concerning juvenile bindover. I'd just like to be able to speak to the fact that we looked at those two things, and that we can give as part of our report in what direction those things are heading, and if we have any kind of things that we can think of that will goose things along in those directions, that would be good too. Okay. So those are the things that I'm most are top of mind for me. Yeah.
So I agree that these two, from the time we've been here, that we have had advocates really speak highly about these two issues. My question is, what, as a group, our group, do we do to at least start looking into this? I know you're asking that question. Remember, I had asked us as a group committee, can we meet without it having to be a public meeting to at least discuss how do we approach this, or does that have to be? And I'm just being honest. I don't know. If we meet, we need to find out some things before we come to a meeting, and we still trying to spin our wheels about. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but like, what do we do? Can we get together so we can have some answers when we come here? Do that make sense? Or am I?
We have certain restrictions that are placed on us by sunshine laws, as to what we can discuss. I'm of a mind that as long as we don't make any decisions, that, us having a conversation amongst ourselves is not verboten, but it's kind of hard to prove a negative, right? So yeah, well, we met, but we didn't make any decisions, so wink, wink, nod, nod. People may not take that as being what actually happened. So it's really difficult to try to figure that out. And so most of what we do is going to have to be hashed out in the public eye. Okay. And that has its own particular kinds of problems. I think that as it relates to those two primary issues that we were talking about that had gotten so much press, given the way that we're constituted, there's not a whole lot that we can do other than to highlight. Okay. And having a couple of public meetings where people put in front of us what they think the problems are and, what they think the solutions are, might be useful, because at the end of the day, like I said, whatever we do is just going to be a suggestion to the council as to a suggestion that they can make to the court. Okay, so I'm saying all that to say that I think that we move those two items kind of back down on our list of things that we undertake because of the lack of our ability to do anything with them other than to highlight them. and that we focus at this point on the things where we can actually make a difference. And that would seem to me to be in the areas that we've kind of talked about in the last two sessions, which does not mean that I'm any less concerned about those two issues. It just means that I see a necessity for us to stay in our lane and to blow the horn where we can. So we still have to make some decisions about, and this may be just a function of circulating some information between ourselves as to who we want to talk to and setting up a schedule of events as to when we can get to them. Because, you know, I mean, we were constituted back in July, and this is already September, and we lost a whole month kind of in the middle of that, and we're supposed to be finished in December, so that doesn't give us a whole lot of time to finish doing whatever it is that we're going to come up with. Does anybody have any preference as to where we should start as far as the investigative side of this is concerned?
I think that in large part depends on what we're focusing on as far as the issues. I mean, you suggested we come up with 4 or 5. We had to do it quickly. I think in terms of, you know, like the hot button issues you brought up with regard to assigned counsel, that information should be accessible right now. In terms of bindovers, I think the best we're ever going to do is a legislative recommendation, because that's controlled by the legislature. It's not controlled by the court.
And it's not controlled by county council either.
No, but they can certainly make recommendations. I'm sure there's people from the statewide juvenile court system that could make legislative recommendations. Whether our legislature would listen, different issue. But that's part of the, you know, the issue we're dealing with is, for some events, the court's handcuffed.
Well, one of the things that I found interesting in the governor's report was that the governor was recommending that they review this whole thing about mandatory bind over. And so if the pressure is coming from multiple different venues, that what we're doing now doesn't work, perhaps that would cause the legislature to think twice about it, especially in face of empirical evidence to the contrary, which suggests that what they're doing not only is not working, but is actually counterproductive. So, but that's a whole nother different thing. Right. But again, it comes back to who would you like to talk to first? We could set up, because I mean, the first time that we were here, there were 2 or 3 programs that had come in and actually given us some overview on those issues. But now the question is, can we get them to give us some issues on some of the other things that we've been talking to, and would that be useful? What do you think?
I mean, I agree. I think that, you know, that there is a place where I think it'd be well worth the time for us also to make sure that we're thoroughly reviewing, you know, the recommendations that came out of the state work group, because I think those are going to impact every county. So it might be similar suggestions. But as far as where to start, I would defer to you all on who you wanted to invite up to, you know, to inform. I would also, you know, recommend at some point in time, we do have, you know, entities that we're in collaboration with that, you know, do some nationwide work that they could just give a quick overview of other jurisdictions that are having, you know, some impact on youth violence, things of that nature. So if we talk about where do we have an area of control, it is catching young people before they're making decisions that are resulting in very, very serious consequences. And that work has to start when young people show up in the child welfare system. It has to start when young people are showing signs of failing out of educational systems. Some of that preventative work, I think that we have good things going, but we have a long way to go to make an impact on young people. So I don't know if we wanted to do the people that have come up before and have, presented concerns, if they wanted to have some time to have their say, or if we want to also introduce in any partners that are having success with improving outcomes for young people in other jurisdictions, such as, our partners that we're contracted with, just to highlight other programs that maybe we do not have funded. I know we didn't get into talking about, credible messenger models, expanding restorative justice. We're only on the cusp of some of that work and still have a long way to go on that.
I think it would be useful for us to talk to the folks who have a more global view of what's out there, and that would probably be a good place for us to start. And the other thing that I want you all to think about, because I've been obsessing about it a little bit, and that is how we're going to go about putting together a report on what we come up with. So, and mechanically, let alone content-wise. So we need to, if we don't do anything else, we need to think about that. Okay. Is it possible for us to select a date for our next meeting to address the things that I raised with you a little bit earlier? And you can kind of give me an overview, in the interim period about what you think. So to Marvin's point, when we come back, we're not starting back at square one.
So Judge, I got a question. So if we do pick a date, what are we going to do in between?